For 15 years, my family dismissed my multi-million-dollar empire as beginner's luck and treated me like the family failure, until their own accountant walked into our Thanksgiving dinner and called me Miss Castellano, the owner of everything they thought they owned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the windshield of Adriana Castellano's midnight blue Tesla as she navigated the winding mountain roads leading to Millbrook Heights, the exclusive gated community where she'd grown up. At 32, she was returning to her childhood home for what had become an annual ritual of humiliation disguised as a family gathering. Her phone buzzed with yet another text from her mother. "Adriana, darling, I hope you're not bringing any of those business associates of yours to dinner tonight. You know how your father feels about your little ventures, Mom." Little ventures. Adriana's jaw clenched as she read the message. Her little ventures included 3 successful tech startups, a portfolio of commercial real estate worth over $40 million, and a venture capital firm that had backed some of the most innovative companies in Palmetto Valley. But to the Castellano family, she was still the youngest daughter who dropped out of law school to chase pipe dreams in the business world. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was driving through the very neighborhood her family couldn't afford anymore, not since her father's law firm had started struggling and her brother's restaurant chain had filed for bankruptcy protection. Yet somehow in their minds she remained the disappointment. As she pulled through the familiar wrought iron gates, memories flooded back. This had been her world once: manicured lawns, Mediterranean-style mansions, and the suffocating weight of family expectations. The Castellanos had been Millbrook Heights royalty for 3 generations. Her grandfather, Domenico Castellano, had built the most prestigious law firm in Palmetto County. Her father, Vincent, had expanded it into corporate law. Her older brother, Raphael, was supposed to continue the legacy while building his culinary empire. And then there was Adriana, the wild card, who'd refused to follow the script. She remembered the day she'd announced her decision to leave Whitmore Law School during her second year. The family had gathered in the same dining room she was about to enter tonight, and the reaction had been swift and brutal. "You're throwing away everything we've built," her father had thundered, his face red with embarrassment. "The Castellano name means something in this town, and you're treating it like garbage." Her mother, Carmela, had been more subtle but equally cutting. "Sweetheart, business is so unpredictable. You need something stable, something respectable. What will people think?" Even Raphael, whom she'd idolized growing up, had shaken his head in disappointment. "Audie, you're being naive. The business world will eat you alive. You should stick to what our family knows: law, tradition, respectability." But Adriana had seen something they hadn't. During her internship at Castellano & Associates, she'd noticed how many of their clients were struggling with outdated business models, inefficient systems, and a complete lack of digital strategy. She'd written proposal after proposal, suggesting ways the firm could modernize, ways they could help their clients adapt to the changing marketplace. Each proposal had been dismissed with a patronizing smile and a pat on the head. "That's very creative, dear, but let the experienced professionals handle the business side of things." So she'd left. With nothing but her trust fund inheritance from her grandmother, a modest $50,000 that her family considered play money, she'd rented a tiny apartment in the arts district of downtown Riverdale and started her first company, Castellano Digital Solutions. The early days had been brutal: 18-hour workdays, ramen noodles for dinner, and the constant weight of her family's disapproval. When Raphael's first restaurant, Nana's Kitchen, had opened to great fanfare 6 months later, the contrast couldn't have been starker. The family celebrated his success with champagne and pride, while Adriana's growing client base was dismissed as a few small accounts that won't last. Even when her first company sold for $2.3 million 2 years later, the family narrative remained unchanged. "Lucky timing," her father had said with a shrug. "Right place, right time. Don't let it go to your head." "The tech bubble always benefits someone," her mother had added. Just don't assume it will happen twice. The pattern had continued through every subsequent success. When her second startup, an innovative logistics platform for small businesses, sold for $8 million, it was attributed to market conditions. When she'd started buying commercial properties in the up-and-coming Riverside district, investments that had tripled in value, it was because she'd gotten lucky with location. The family's willful blindness to her achievements had become almost comical. At last year's Christmas dinner, while Raphael struggled to keep his third restaurant location afloat, and her father dealt with yet another major client defection, Adriana had been quietly closing a deal that would make her the primary investor in a revolutionary green energy startup. But the conversation at dinner had centered around when she was going to get serious about her career and maybe consider going back to finish law school. "It's never too late to get back on track," her mother had said gently, as if Adriana were a wayward teenager rather than a successful entrepreneur who'd been featured on the cover of Palmetto Business Monthly. What made it even more frustrating was that she'd been helping them financially for years, though they didn't know it. When Raphael's flagship restaurant had faced closure due to cash flow problems, an anonymous investor had provided the bridge loan that kept it operating. When her father's law firm had nearly lost their prime downtown office space, a mysterious client had prepaid a massive retainer that covered 6 months of rent. When her mother's charity foundation had struggled to meet its fundraising goals, a series of generous donations from various sources had put them back on track. But to maintain family harmony and her own sanity, Adriana had kept these interventions secret. She'd learned long ago that her family's pride wouldn't allow them to accept help from someone they still saw as the family screw-up. Tonight was supposed to be different, though. Tonight, something would happen that would finally force them to see the truth. Her phone buzzed with a text from her financial advisor and family friend, Harrison Blackwell. "Everything is in place for tonight. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once the truth comes out, there's no going back." 9sh. Adriana parked in the circular driveway, behind Raphael's leased BMW and her father's aging Mercedes. Through the dining room windows, she could see her family already gathered around the familiar mahogany table, probably discussing Raphael's latest business challenges, or her father's ongoing struggles with modernizing his practice. She took a deep breath, grabbed the bottle of expensive wine she'd brought, a vintage that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and walked toward the front door. In a few hours, everything would change. The family accountant would arrive for what they thought was a routine discussion about restructuring some of their financial obligations. Instead, he would reveal that their lucky little sister owned the building housing Raphael's restaurants, held the mortgage on their parents' house, and was the silent partner behind the investment firm that had been keeping all of their businesses afloat. The masquerade was finally about to end. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Castellano family mansion looked exactly as Adriana remembered: imposing stone facade, perfectly manicured gardens, and an air of old money sophistication that had always felt more like a beautiful prison than a home. As she rang the doorbell, she could hear the familiar sounds of family chaos echoing from within. Her mother's voice directing someone about table settings, Raphael's animated storytelling, and her father's booming laugh. "Adriana, there's my baby sister," Raphael's voice carried through the foyer as the heavy oak door swung open. At 35, he still carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never really failed at anything important. At least, not in ways the family acknowledged. His embrace was warm and genuine, one of the few things about these gatherings that Adriana still treasured. "Rafe, you look good," she said, and meant it. Despite his business struggles, her brother had always possessed an infectious optimism that she envied. Where she'd learned to armor herself with cold professionalism, Raphael still believed the next opportunity was just around the corner. Come, Mom's been cooking since yesterday. You know how she gets when the whole family's together." He guided her through the marble-floored hallway lined with family portraits. 3 generations of Castellano success, with conspicuously few photos featuring Adriana's business achievements. The dining room was a testament to Carmela Castellano's attention to detail. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and the table was set for 8 people, family plus a few expected guests. The room smelled of garlic, rosemary, and her mother's famous osso buco, scents that transported Adriana back to childhood Sunday dinners when life had seemed simpler. "Adriana, sweetheart!" Her mother appeared from the kitchen, flowers still dusting her apron, arms outstretched. Carmela Castellano was 63 but could pass for 50, thanks to regular visits to the best dermatologist in Palmetto County. Visits that Adriana's anonymous donations to her mother's spa fund had made possible. "Hi, Mom, something smells incredible." The embrace was warm but brief. Carmela had never been one for extended displays of affection, preferring to show love through elaborate meals and carefully orchestrated family gatherings. "Your father's in his study with Harrison Blackwell. You remember Harrison, our accountant? He's been helping us reorganize some things. They should be finished soon." Carmela's voice carried a slight tension that Adriana had learned to recognize over the years. Money conversations in the Castellano household had become increasingly frequent and increasingly strained. Through the study's partially open door, Adriana could see her father gesturing emphatically while Harrison nodded with professional patience. Vincent Castellano had aged considerably since her last visit, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, and a weariness that spoke to the weight of keeping up appearances, while everything crumbled beneath the surface. "How's Dad doing, really?" Adriana asked quietly, as she helped her mother arrange wine glasses. Carmela's hands paused for just a moment. "He's fine. Stressed, you know, but fine. The legal business is changing. All these young firms with their technology and their marketing. Your father built his reputation on relationships and quality work, but apparently that's not enough anymore." It was a familiar refrain. The Castellano family had perfected the art of acknowledging problems without actually addressing them. Everything was always fine, or just a rough patch, or temporary market conditions. The idea that fundamental changes might be necessary was too threatening to consider. "What about Raphael's restaurants?" "Oh, you know your brother, always optimistic. He says the 3rd location just needs time to find its footing. The downtown spot is doing well, and the Riverside location has a loyal following." Carmela's voice brightened when discussing Raphael, the way it always did. Her eldest son could do no wrong, even when he was clearly doing everything wrong. The front door chimed again, and Adriana heard Raphael greeting more arrivals. Moments later, he appeared with their Aunt Gianna and Uncle Paolo, followed by their cousin Marco, Raphael's business partner and closest friend. "Adriana! Look at you, always so put together." Aunt Gianna air-kissed both her cheeks, the gesture accompanied by an appraising look that took in Adriana's designer dress and subtle but expensive jewelry. "Still playing around with those business ventures of yours?" Playing around. The phrase hit exactly as intended. "Something like that," Adriana replied with a practiced smile. Uncle Paolo, ever the diplomat, changed the subject. "How's the weather been in Riverdale? I heard you bought a place downtown." "I did. It's a converted warehouse in the Arts District. Great light for working." She didn't mention that she'd bought the entire building, or that the Arts District had been a calculated investment that was now worth 4 times what she'd paid. "An artist's loft. How creative," Carmela said in the tone she reserved for Adriana's life choices. Supportive enough to avoid open criticism, condescending enough to make her position clear. Marco, who'd been quietly nursing a beer, finally spoke up. "Actually, I've been hearing some interesting things about what's happening in that area. Lots of development, property values going crazy, someone's making serious money down there." Lucky timing for whoever got in early. Vincent's voice boomed as he emerged from the study with Harrison trailing behind. Her father looked tired, but forced his usual commanding presence. Harrison here was just explaining some new investment opportunities. Apparently, there's quite a bit of money flowing around Palmetto County these days. Harrison caught Adriana's eye briefly, and she saw the question there. They'd planned this moment carefully, but he was giving her one last chance to change her mind. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "Good evening, everyone," Harrison said, his professional demeanor intact. "I hope I'm not interrupting family time. I just needed to finish up a few things with Vincent and Carmela." "Not at all, Harrison. You're practically family," Carmela waved dismissively. "Stay for dinner. We have plenty." As they settled around the table, Adriana found herself in her usual position, physically present but somehow peripheral to the real conversation. Raphael dominated the discussion with stories about his latest menu innovations and plans for expansion. Vincent held court with observations about changes in the legal profession and local politics. Carmela orchestrated everything with the skill of a conductor, ensuring everyone felt included while maintaining the family hierarchy. "So, Adriana," Marco said during a lull in conversation, "what's keeping you busy these days? Still doing that consulting thing?" The table's attention turned to her with the polite interest usually reserved for children's school projects. "A few different things. Some technology investments, some real estate. Keeping busy." "Technology," Uncle Paolo nodded sagely. "That's where all the money is these days. Though I have to say it seems like such a gamble. Here today, gone tomorrow." "At least she's trying different things," Raphael said loyally. "Better than being stuck in one field when everything changes." It was meant as support, but it still stung. Even Raphael's defense characterized her success as random experimentation rather than strategic planning. "The important thing," Vincent said, cutting into his ossobuco with surgical precision, "is having something solid to fall back on. Trends come and go, but people will always need lawyers, doctors, real professionals." "Absolutely," Harrison said quietly, and something in his tone made everyone look up. "Speaking of which, there are a few financial matters we should probably discuss while everyone's here. Nothing urgent, but some interesting developments in the family's investment portfolio." Adriana felt her heart rate quicken. The moment was approaching faster than she'd expected. Around the table, her family continued eating, completely unaware that their world was about to shift fundamentally. The masquerade had 15 more minutes to live. The conversation continued to flow around the dinner table like a well-rehearsed symphony, each family member playing their familiar parts. Raphael regaled them with stories about celebrity customers who'd visited his flagship restaurant, while Uncle Paolo shared gossip from his construction business. Adriana found herself studying the faces around the table, these people she loved despite everything, who had shaped her into who she was today through both their support and their dismissal. "Harrison, you've been awfully quiet," Carmela observed, ever the attentive hostess. "How's business treating you?" "I imagine everyone needs a good accountant these days, especially with all the economic uncertainty." Harrison set down his wineglass carefully, and Adriana noticed the slight tremor in his hand. He'd been her financial advisor for 8 years, ever since she'd needed someone to help structure her first major acquisition. Over time, he'd become more than just a professional contact. He was one of the few people who truly understood the scope of what she'd built. "Actually, Carmela, that's what I wanted to discuss with everyone." His voice carried a weight that made the conversation around the table gradually die down. "There have been some developments in several of your financial situations that I think the family should be aware of." Vincent's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of developments?" "Well," Harrison opened his leather portfolio and withdrew several manila folders. "It started a few months ago when I was conducting the annual review of the family's various accounts. I noticed some unusual patterns in the investment flows." Adriana's pulse quickened. This wasn't how they'd planned it. Harrison was supposed to wait until after dessert, when the mood was relaxed and everyone was settled. But something in the family's casual dismissal of her achievements tonight had apparently pushed him to move faster. "Patterns?" Raphael leaned forward, his entrepreneur instincts suddenly alert. What kind of patterns? Consistent anonymous investments, strategic debt buyouts, and what appeared to be coordinated financial support across multiple family business ventures. Harrison's professional demeanor was intact, but Adriana could see the determination in his eyes. At first, I assumed it was perhaps a family trust, or some kind of inheritance distribution that hadn't been properly documented. We don't have any family trusts, Vincent said slowly, his lawyer's mind immediately zeroing in on the legal implications. And certainly no undisclosed inheritance money floating around. That's exactly what concerned me, Harrison nodded. So I began conducting a more thorough investigation, tracing the sources of these financial interventions. Aunt Gianna looked confused. Financial interventions? What are you talking about, Harrison? I'm talking about approximately $4.2 million in direct and indirect financial support that has been provided to various Castellano family members and businesses over the past 6 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Adriana watched as the number hit each family member differently. Shock, confusion, and then the inevitable question that she could see forming on their faces. $4 million? Marco was the first to find his voice. From where? From who? That's what I spent the last 3 months investigating, Harrison said, pulling out a thick report, and the results were surprising. Vincent's face had gone pale. Harrison, if there's some kind of financial irregularity involving the family, we need to know immediately. I won't have the Castellano name associated with anything improper. Oh, there's nothing improper about it, Harrison assured him quickly. In fact, it's all perfectly legal, properly documented, and honestly quite brilliant from a strategic standpoint. Then who? Carmela began, but Harrison held up a hand. Let me walk you through what I discovered. Raphael, your flagship restaurant was saved from closure 3 years ago by a $300,000 bridge loan from what appeared to be a private investment group called Riverside Holdings, correct? Raphael nodded slowly. Yeah, they came in when the bank was threatening foreclosure. Amazing timing, and the terms were incredibly generous, almost too good to be true. And Vincent, Harrison continued, your law firm received a substantial retainer payment from Palmetto Development Consortium 18 months ago, which allowed you to maintain your downtown office space during a particularly difficult period. A retainer that came out of nowhere, Vincent admitted, his voice growing quieter. For work that never actually materialized, though they insisted we keep the payment regardless. Carmela, your charity foundation has received several large anonymous donations over the past few years, totaling nearly $200,000, always arriving just when funding was most critical. Carmela's hand went to her throat. Yes, we've been incredibly blessed. We always assumed it was one of the major families in town who preferred to remain anonymous. And Marco, Harrison turned to Raphael's business partner, the equipment financing for your second restaurant location came through at rates significantly below market value from a company called Valley Capital Solutions. Right, we never understood how we qualified for such favorable terms, Marco said, his voice barely above a whisper. Harrison took a deep breath. Here's what I discovered. Riverside Holdings, Palmetto Development Consortium, and Valley Capital Solutions are all subsidiary companies of a larger investment firm called Castellano Ventures. Castellano Ventures? Uncle Paolo echoed. But we don't have any family investment company. You don't, Harrison agreed, but someone in this room does. The tension around the table was so thick Adriana could practically taste it. Every eye was now fixed on Harrison, waiting for the revelation that would change everything. The sole owner and operator of Castellano Ventures, along with its 17 subsidiary companies and a portfolio worth approximately $47 million, is sitting right here at this table. Vincent's voice was barely a whisper. Who? Harrison's eyes moved slowly around the table before settling on Adriana. Your daughter, your sister, the woman you've all been calling Lucky for the past 6 years. The silence that followed was so complete that Adriana could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting off the seconds as her family's perception of reality crumbled and rebuilt itself. Raphael was the first to speak, his voice hoarse with shock. "Adriana?" She met his eyes, then looked around the table at each beloved, complicated face. "It's true." But how?" Carmela's voice was faint. "Your little consulting business." "Isn't little, and isn't just consulting," Adriana said quietly. "It hasn't been for years." Vincent leaned back in his chair as if he'd been physically struck. "You're telling me that my daughter, who I've been worrying about for years, is worth $47 million. Actually," Harrison consulted his notes, "current portfolio value is closer to $52 million, but who's counting?" Marco let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Adriana. All this time we thought—" "You thought I was playing around," she finished for him. "You thought I was lucky. You thought I was naive and unprofessional, and that I'd never amount to anything substantial." The words hung in the air like an accusation, which perhaps they were. "But why?" Aunt Gianna's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell us? Why let us worry? Why let us think?" "Think what?" Adriana's voice grew stronger. "Think that I was a failure. Think that I needed your guidance and protection. Think that the only way to be successful was to follow exactly in Dad's footsteps or Raphael's footsteps." She looked around the table at their stunned faces. "How many times have I tried to share my successes with you? How many times have I mentioned deals or acquisitions or investments, only to have them dismissed as cute or lucky or temporary?" "We didn't know," Raphael said weakly. "You didn't want to know," Adriana corrected. "Because if you'd known, it would have meant admitting that maybe, just maybe, I knew what I was doing. Maybe it would have meant acknowledging that the family failure had actually succeeded beyond any of your wildest dreams." Harrison cleared his throat. "There's more." Everyone turned to him with expressions of shell-shocked anticipation. "The building that houses Raphael's restaurants? Adriana owns it. The mortgage on this house? Held by one of her subsidiary companies. Vincent, that office space downtown that you've been struggling to afford? She's your landlord." The revelation hit like a tsunami. Adriana watched as the full scope of what she'd accomplished, what she'd hidden, sank in around the table. Her father, the man who'd spent years worrying about her future, owned nothing that she didn't ultimately control. The masquerade wasn't just ending. It was exploding. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before chaos erupted around the dinner table. Multiple conversations began simultaneously, voices overlapping in a cacophony of shock, disbelief, and desperate attempts to process what they'd just learned. Wait. Raphael held up both hands, his face cycling through expressions of amazement and confusion. "You're telling me that when my restaurant was about to go under, the investor who saved me was my baby sister?" "Not just saved," Harrison interjected, consulting his detailed files. "She also facilitated the lease negotiations for your second location at 40% below market rate, and the equipment financing that allowed you to expand your kitchen operations." Marco slumped back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "The equipment loan, that was you too?" "Adriana, we thought we'd somehow hit the lottery with that deal." "You did hit the lottery," Adriana said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotional whirlwind around the table. "You just didn't know I was the one buying the tickets." Vincent stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He walked to the window overlooking the garden, his back to the family. "This is impossible. I've been practicing law for 35 years. I know how to read financial documents, how to trace money trails. How did I miss all of this?" "Because she didn't want you to find it," Harrison explained. "The structure she created is incredibly sophisticated. Shell companies within holding companies. All perfectly legal, but designed to obscure the source of the investments. It took me 3 months with full access to all the records to piece it together." Carmela had gone very still, her hands folded in her lap, staring at her youngest daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Adriana, sweetheart, I need to understand something. When did this start? When did you… She struggled for words. When did you become this? Which this, do you mean, Mom? Adriana's voice carried a bit of bitterness. When did I become successful? When did I become wealthy? Or when did I become someone you apparently don't recognize? That's not what I meant, Carmela said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. Aunt Gianna, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. But why hide it? Why not tell us? Do you have any idea how many nights I've laid awake worrying about you, thinking you were struggling, thinking you needed help? The question hit harder than Adriana had expected. She'd been prepared for anger, for accusations, even for disbelief. But the genuine hurt in her aunt's voice cracked something inside her chest. Because every time I tried to share any success with you, it was dismissed, she said, her voice growing stronger. Do you remember 2 years ago at Christmas when I mentioned that I'd helped develop a new logistics platform? Vaguely, Uncle Paolo admitted. Dad said it was interesting hobby work. Raphael suggested I should be careful not to get in over my head. Mom asked if I was making enough to pay my rent. Adriana looked around the table. That logistics platform sold for $8 million 3 months later. Raphael's face went white. $8 million? But you said… You thought what you wanted to think, Adriana interrupted. It was easier to believe I was playing around with small projects than to consider that I might actually know what I was doing. Vincent turned back from the window, his face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been pride. Show me the documents, he said in his courtroom voice. I need to see the actual paperwork. Harrison slid a thick folder across the table. Complete corporate structure, financial statements for the past 5 years, and documentation of every transaction involving family members. As Vincent opened the folder and began scanning the documents, his expression changed from skepticism to amazement to something approaching awe. These numbers. Adriana, these are Fortune 500 level revenues for some of these quarters. The green energy startup she invested in last year just went public, Harrison added. Her initial $2 million investment is now worth approximately $12 million. $12 million? Marco's voice cracked. From one investment? That's just one of 17 active investments in her current portfolio, Harrison continued relentlessly. She also owns 3 buildings in the downtown district that have appreciated by an average of 300%, holds equity positions in 6 emerging technology companies, and has a venture capital fund that's attracted investments from some of the largest institutional investors on the East Coast. Carmela stood slowly and walked around the table to where Adriana sat. For a moment, mother and daughter looked at each other across a chasm of misunderstanding and lost time. I don't know who you are, Carmela said quietly, and the words hit like physical blows. I'm the same person I've always been, Adriana replied, but her voice wavered. I'm your daughter, who wanted nothing more than for you to be proud of her accomplishments instead of worried about her failures. But we didn't know there were accomplishments to be proud of, Raphael protested. You never told us the scale of what you were doing. Because you never asked. The words exploded out of Adriana with years of pent-up frustration. When was the last time any of you asked about my work beyond surface pleasantries? When did any of you show genuine interest in what I was building? She stood up, her composure finally cracking. Do you know what it's like to sit at family dinners listening to Dad complain about struggling with new technology when I've built 3 tech companies? To hear Raphael worry about restaurant financing when I could solve his problems with a single phone call? To watch Mom stress about charity funding when I've been anonymously donating to her foundation for years? The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, laden with the weight of missed opportunities and failed communication. Why didn't you just tell us? Vincent's voice was quiet now, stripped of its usual authority. Why all the secrecy and shell companies? Why not just help us directly? Adriana laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because the few times I did try to help directly, you all found ways to turn it down or minimize it. Remember when I offered to design a new website for Raphael's restaurant? You said he should work with real professionals. When I suggested Dad's firm could benefit from some digital marketing strategies, I was told to leave business advice to people with experience. Those were different circumstances, Vincent protested weakly. No, Dad, they weren't. They were exactly the same circumstances. You saw advice from your daughter as amateur hour, so I had to become an anonymous professional for you to take me seriously. Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps now would be a good time to discuss what happens next. Everyone turned to him, grateful for a break from the emotional intensity. The reality is, Harrison continued, Adriana is now in a position where she needs to make some decisions about how she wants to handle her family's financial situations going forward. The anonymous support structure was sustainable when the amounts were smaller, but given the growth of her portfolio and the increasing needs of various family businesses. What are you saying? Uncle Paulo asked. I'm saying she can't keep secretly subsidizing everyone forever without it becoming problematic from both a tax and business perspective. At some point, the family needs to decide how to move forward with this new information. Adriana looked around the table at her family's faces, some stunned, some hurt, some struggling to process the complete upheaval of everything they thought they knew about their family dynamics. I never wanted it to come to this, she said quietly. I just wanted to help the people I love while building something I was passionate about. But somewhere along the way, it became this elaborate deception, because the truth seemed too threatening to the family's sense of order. So what now? Raphael asked, his voice small. What happens to us now? It was the question they were all thinking, the one that would determine whether this revelation destroyed their family or somehow brought them closer together. Adriana took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would change everything forever. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had already consumed everything familiar. Adriana could see the wheels turning in each family member's mind as they grappled with implications that stretched far beyond mere money. This wasn't just about wealth. It was about power, pride, and the fundamental structure of their family hierarchy. Vincent was the first to break the silence, his lawyer's instincts kicking in despite his emotional turmoil. I need to understand the legal implications here. If you own our mortgage, our business properties, if you've been the silent partner in our ventures, what does that mean for our autonomy, our independence? It means, Adriana said carefully, that legally, I have significant control over most of your financial lives. But it also means that I've never exercised that control in any way that you've noticed. Until now, Raphael said quietly, and there was something sharp in his voice that Adriana hadn't heard before, until you decided to reveal it all. The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. I didn't decide anything. Harrison discovered the connections during routine financial reviews. I've spent 6 years trying to help without anyone knowing. Without anyone knowing, Carmela repeated slowly, and her tone had shifted from shock to something colder. Without giving us the choice to accept or decline your help. Without letting us maintain our dignity. Your dignity? Adriana felt heat rising in her chest. Mom, your foundation was going to shut down 3 years ago. Dad's law firm was facing bankruptcy. Raphael's first restaurant would have closed permanently. Where exactly was the dignity in watching everything fall apart when I had the resources to help? The dignity, Vincent said, rising from his chair again, was in the choice. The dignity was in either succeeding or failing on our own merits. Our own merits? Adriana's voice rose to match his. Dad, your biggest client left because they needed digital contract management and you refused to modernize. Raphael's first restaurant was failing because he was trying to run it like it was 1985. Uncle Paulo's construction business was hemorrhaging money because he wouldn't invest in project management software. These weren't mysterious market forces. These were fixable problems that you all chose to ignore. That's not the point, Raphael interjected, and now his face was flushed with anger. The point is that you made those decisions for us. You decided we couldn't handle our own problems. I decided that I loved you too much to watch you destroy yourselves out of stubbornness. Stubbornness? Uncle Paolo's voice boomed across the room. You call maintaining our independence stubbornness? You call wanting to build something with our own hands stubbornness? Aunt Gianna had been unusually quiet, but now she spoke with a tremor in her voice. All those times I worried about you, called to check on you, sent you care packages because I thought you were struggling, you were probably laughing at us. I was never laughing, Adriana said fiercely. I treasured every phone call, every care package, every moment when you showed that you cared about me. That's exactly why I couldn't bear to watch you struggle when I had the power to help. But it wasn't real, Marco said, his voice hollow. None of it was real. Every success we thought we'd earned, every problem we thought we'd solved. It was all you pulling strings behind the scenes. That's not true, Harrison interjected, but Vincent waved him silent. Let me ask you something, Adriana, her father said, his courtroom voice now fully engaged. When you bought our mortgage, when you became Raphael's landlord, when you engineered these financial arrangements, did it ever occur to you that you were essentially treating us like children? Like we couldn't be trusted to manage our own lives? The words hit like a physical blow because they echoed her own deepest fears about what she'd done. I was trying to protect you. From what? From failure? From struggle? From the consequences of our own decisions? Vincent's voice was gaining strength. Adriana, those experiences, even the failures, they're what make us who we are. They're how we learn, how we grow, how we maintain our self-respect. Your self-respect? Adriana stood up, her own anger finally matching theirs. Dad, where was your self-respect when you were 2 months behind on office rent and lying awake at night wondering how you were going to tell Mom? Raphael, where was your self-respect when you were considering selling your grandmother's recipes to a chain restaurant just to keep the doors open? Those were our problems to solve, Raphael shot back. And you weren't solving them. The words exploded out of her. You were all drowning in your own pride, too stubborn to adapt, too afraid to ask for help, too committed to this fantasy that success means doing everything exactly the way it's always been done. Carmela stood slowly, her face pale but determined. I think, she said in a voice that cut through the shouting, we need to take a step back here. The room fell silent. Harrison, she continued, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but I think the family needs some time to process this information privately. It was a dismissal, politely delivered but unmistakable. Harrison began gathering his papers, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the evening had taken. Of course. I'll be available if anyone has questions about the financial details. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I've never seen anyone go to such lengths to help their family while asking for nothing in return. After he left, the silence returned, heavier now and charged with hurt feelings and wounded pride. I can't believe this, Raphael said, shaking his head. All this time, I thought I was building something. I thought my success with the restaurants meant something. It does mean something, Adriana insisted. You're an incredible chef. You create experiences that bring people joy. You've built a loyal customer base. With your money, in your buildings. With financing you arranged. His voice was bitter. How much of my success is actually mine, Adriana? How much of any of our success is real? All of it, she said desperately. I never created your talent. I never cooked a single meal in your kitchen. I never argued a case for Dad or managed a construction project for Uncle Paolo. I just removed some of the financial obstacles. Some of the obstacles? Vincent laughed harshly. You removed all of them. You turned our lives into some kind of elaborate safety net without our knowledge or consent. Aunt Gianna was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. I feel so foolish. All those conversations about little business ventures, and we were talking to someone who could probably buy half the county. It was never about the money, Adriana pleaded. I've never cared about impressing you with wealth. I just wanted to be part of the family without constantly defending my choices. So instead, you chose to manipulate us, Uncle Paolo said coldly. I never manipulated anyone. I solved problems behind the scenes. Without our knowledge, without our consent, without giving us the opportunity to choose our own path, even if that path included failure. Vincent's voice was final, judicial. That's manipulation, Adriana, regardless of your intentions. The accusation hung in the air like a verdict. Around the table, Adriana could see her family's faces hardening, their initial shock crystallizing into something more dangerous, resentment. I need some air, Raphael said abruptly, pushing back from the table. This is too much. We all need time to think, Carmela agreed. Adriana, maybe it would be best maybe you should go home tonight. Let us process this. The suggestion felt like exile. Mom, please, can't we talk about this? Can't we figure out how to move forward? How do we move forward? Uncle Paolo asked. How do we have any kind of normal relationship knowing that you hold all the cards? Knowing that everything we think we've accomplished has been subsidized by your charity? It's not charity, Adriana said weakly. Then what is it? Raphael demanded. What do you call secretly paying for someone's life because you don't think they can handle it themselves? She had no answer that wouldn't make things worse. One by one, her family members began to leave the dining room, until only Adriana and Carmela remained, facing each other across the remnants of what was supposed to have been a celebration of family togetherness. Mom, Adriana said quietly, I never meant for it to happen this way. Carmela looked at her daughter, really looked at her, for a long moment. I believe you, sweetheart. But intention and impact are two different things, and the impact of what you've done, I don't know if we can come back from this. As Adriana drove home through the winding mountain roads, the rain had returned, and she couldn't tell if the water on her cheeks was from the storm outside or the one that had just torn through her family. 3 weeks passed without a single phone call from any family member. The silence felt like a physical weight pressing down on Adriana's chest as she sat in her downtown office, staring out at the cityscape that had once represented freedom and possibility. Now it felt like a gilded cage, beautiful but isolating. Her assistant, Miranda, knocked softly on the doorframe. The Morrison Group is here for the quarterly review meeting. Adriana forced herself to focus. Business continued regardless of personal upheaval, and she had responsibilities to investors, employees, and partners who depended on her decisions. But maintaining professional composure had become increasingly difficult when every success felt hollow without family to share it with. The meeting dragged on for 2 hours as they reviewed portfolio performance, discussed new investment opportunities, and analyzed market trends. Adriana participated mechanically, her mind constantly drifting to the last image she had of her family, their faces turned away from her as she left that devastating dinner. Adriana, David Morrison's voice cut through her reverie. You seem to zone out there for a moment. Are you all right? She realized the entire conference room was staring at her expectantly. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? We were discussing the Riverside District Development Project. Your initial investment has positioned you as the primary stakeholder, and the City Council is requesting a formal presentation on the long-term vision for the area. The Riverside District, the place where she'd made her first major real estate gamble. The neighborhood that had transformed from forgotten industrial space into the city's most vibrant cultural center. It was also where Raphael's second restaurant was located, in a building she owned, benefiting from foot traffic she'd helped create through strategic development investments. I'll need some time to prepare, she said finally. There are some complications with that particular project. After the meeting ended, Adriana found herself walking the streets of the Riverside District instead of returning to her office. The area bustled with activity, art galleries, boutique shops, trendy restaurants, and the kind of mixed-income housing that created genuine communities rather than gentrified bubbles. She'd been proud of what they'd built here, proud of the careful balance between development and preservation, between profit and social responsibility. She paused outside Raphael's restaurant, Nana's table, and watched through the large windows as the lunch crowd enjoyed her brother's innovative take on traditional Italian cuisine. Even from the sidewalk, she could see his passion in every interaction with customers, every carefully plated dish that emerged from the kitchen. How could he think his success wasn't real? How could any of them believe that talent and dedication could be purchased? Miss Castellano? She turned to find Tony Riverbend, the district's community organizer, approaching with a warm smile. Tony had been instrumental in ensuring that the Riverside development benefited longtime residents rather than displacing them. Tony, good to see you. How's the family? Can't complain. Kids are thriving. Maria's bakery is doing better than ever, and we just secured funding for the new community center. His expression grew more serious. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. There's been some tension in the community lately. What kind of tension? People are starting to ask questions about the ownership structure of some of the buildings. Word got out that there's a single investor behind a lot of the development, and some folks are worried about what that means for the future of the neighborhood. Adriana felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. Even her professional success was becoming complicated by the secrecy she'd maintained. What kind of questions? The usual concerns about absentee landlords, potential rent increases, whether the community input we've had will continue to matter if one person controls too much of the district. Tony studied her face carefully. I've been defending the current arrangement because the results speak for themselves, but I'd feel better if I knew more about the investor's long-term intentions. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was another person she'd been helping anonymously, another relationship built on carefully maintained ignorance of her role in his community's success. Tony, she said slowly, what if I told you that the investor is someone who genuinely cares about the community, someone who's been involved from the beginning and has no intention of changing the collaborative approach you've experienced? I'd say that's exactly what I'd want to hear, but I'd also say that communities have heard those promises before, and they don't always pan out when circumstances change. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart leaped when she saw Raphael's name, but the message itself was formal and cold. Need to discuss restaurant lease terms. Can you have your property management company contact me? Not, can we talk, or I miss you, or even, this is weird but we need to figure it out. Just a business transaction with his sister who happened to own his building. I have to go, she told Tony, but let's schedule a proper meeting soon. There are some things about the district's ownership structure that the community should know. As she walked back to her car, Adriana's phone rang. Harrison's name appeared on the screen. How are you holding up? He asked without preamble. I've been better, Raphael just texted asking about lease terms. Not his sister about family dynamics, his landlord about business arrangements. That's probably healthy, actually. It suggests he's trying to process the new reality rather than just running away from it. It doesn't feel healthy. It feels like I've lost my brother and gained another tenant. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Adriana, I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about whether there's a way to restructure things, to give your family more agency in the situation. What do you mean? I mean, what if we explored options for transferring ownership of some assets back to them? Not as gifts, which would probably feel like more charity, but as genuine business partnerships where they have real equity and decision-making power? The idea intrigued her, but she could already see the complications. They'd never accept what they'd see as handouts. And honestly, I'm not sure they're ready for the responsibility of owning assets worth millions of dollars. Maybe that's not your decision to make anymore. The words hit her like a slap. What do you mean? I mean that part of the problem here is that you've been making decisions for people who are perfectly capable of making their own decisions, even if those decisions sometimes lead to failure. Adriana found herself sitting in her car in the parking garage beneath her office building, staring at the concrete walls while Harrison's words echoed in her mind. Was she still doing it? Still deciding what was best for everyone else? You're right, she said finally. I need to stop managing their lives and start, what? Just let everything collapse if that's what they choose? You need to start treating them like adults who deserve to know the truth about their own circumstances and make their own choices about how to handle that truth. Even if they make bad choices, especially if they make bad choices. Adriana, you've spent 6 years protecting them from the consequences of their decisions. Maybe it's time to let them own those consequences, both good and bad. After ending the call, she sat in the silence of the underground garage and forced herself to confront an uncomfortable truth. She had been treating her family like children, not out of malice or a desire for control, but out of love and fear. Fear that they would fail, fear that they would struggle, fear that they would blame her for not helping when she had the resources to make their problems disappear. But in trying to protect them from failure, she'd also robbed them of the satisfaction of genuine success. In trying to solve their problems, she'd made herself the center of their financial universe without their knowledge or consent. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a group text from her mother. Family meeting Sunday at 2 p.m. Your presence is requested but not required. The formal language felt like a knife to the heart, but underneath the coldness, she detected something else, an opening. They wanted to see her, even if they weren't ready to forgive her. Adriana started her car and drove toward home, her mind already working on a plan that would be the hardest thing she'd ever done, harder than building her first company, harder than making her first million, harder than keeping her success secret for 6 years. She was going to have to give up control. She was going to have to trust her family to make their own decisions about their own lives, even if those decisions led them away from her. She was going to have to cross the threshold from protector to partner, from puppet master to participant, from the person who solved everyone's problems to someone who respected their right to solve their own. The question was whether her family would be willing to cross that threshold with her, or whether the damage she'd done to their trust was irreparable. Sunday couldn't come fast enough, and yet she dreaded it with every fiber of her being. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that had always reminded Adriana of new beginnings, but as she stood outside her childhood home, the familiar house felt more like a courthouse where her fate would be decided. She'd spent the entire weekend preparing for this meeting, drafting proposals for restructuring the family's financial arrangements, creating detailed plans for transferring ownership, and rehearsing apologies that never seemed adequate. The front door opened before she could ring the bell. Vincent stood there, his expression unreadable but notably less hostile than it had been 3 weeks ago. Adriana, thank you for coming. The formal tone stung, but she detected something softer underneath, perhaps exhaustion rather than anger. Thank you for inviting me. The family had gathered in the living room instead of the dining room, a choice that felt deliberately casual. Raphael sat in the corner armchair, his usual easy smile replaced by a carefully neutral expression. Carmela occupied her favorite spot on the sofa, hands folded in her lap with the kind of rigid composure that meant she was fighting strong emotions. Uncle Paolo and Aunt Gianna had positioned themselves near the fireplace, while Marco sat cross-legged on the floor, a notebook balanced on his knee. The seating arrangement itself told a story. They'd formed a loose circle with one empty chair positioned slightly apart from the group. Not quite excluded, but definitely separate. We've done a lot of talking over the past few weeks, Vincent began without preamble. About the situation, about our feelings, about what we want to do moving forward. Adriana settled into the designated chair, acutely aware of the physical distance between herself and the others. I've been doing a lot of thinking, too. Good, Carmela said quietly, because we have some things we need to say to you, and some questions we need answered. Raphael leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. First, we want you to know that we don't question your intentions. We understand that you thought you were helping us. The carefully chosen words, thought you were helping, landed like small stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of implication. But we also need you to understand, Uncle Paolo continued, that help without consent isn't really help, it's control disguised as generosity. Adriana nodded slowly. I've come to understand that, and I want to. Let us finish, Aunt Gianna interrupted gently. We've been talking for 3 weeks. Now it's time for you to listen. The rebuke was fair, and Adriana settled back in her chair, forcing herself to remain silent. Marco consulted his notebook. We made a list of all the ways your interventions affected our lives. Not just the financial stuff, but the emotional and psychological impact. He began reading in a clinical tone that somehow made each item more devastating. Raphael's confidence in his business abilities has been severely shaken. He's questioning every success he's had for the past 6 years. Dad's been having what Mom calls professional crisis of faith, because he doesn't know if his law practice is viable without hidden subsidies. Mom's been wondering if her charity work has any real meaning if it's been artificially propped up. The list continued, cataloging the collateral damage of her good intentions. Uncle Paolo, feeling emasculated by discovering his construction business had been secretly supported. Aunt Gianna struggling with embarrassment about years of worry that had been unnecessary. Marco questioning whether his partnership with Raphael was based on legitimate business success or manufactured stability. The worst part, Raphael said when Marco finished reading, isn't the money. It's the uncertainty. We don't know what's real anymore. We don't know which of our achievements were earned and which were facilitated. All of them were earned, Adriana said quickly. You never cooked a meal in my kitchen, Raphael interrupted. But you did make sure I never had to worry about rent, or equipment financing, or cash flow problems that might have forced me to develop better business management skills. The accusation hung in the air, and Adriana realized with growing horror that they might be right. Had her help actually hindered their growth? Had she robbed them of the struggles that might have made them stronger? Vincent stood and walked to the window, a gesture that reminded Adriana painfully of that night 3 weeks ago. We've been debating whether we can continue to have a relationship with you given the power imbalance that now exists. The words hit like a physical blow. Dad. The fact is, he continued without turning around, you own our houses, our businesses, our livelihoods. How do we have family dinners knowing that you could foreclose on everything we think we own? How do we argue about politics or parenting or anything else when you hold all the economic cards? I would never use that power against you. Never. But you have it, Carmela said quietly. Whether you use it or not, you have it. And that changes everything about our relationship dynamics. Aunt Gianna cleared her throat. Which brings us to what we've decided. Adriana's heart began racing. Had they decided to cut her out of their lives entirely? To reject not just her money but her presence? We want you to sell everything, Raphael said bluntly. The buildings, the mortgages, the business interests. We want you to liquidate every financial connection you have to our lives. The proposal hit her like a tsunami. Sell everything? But that would mean we'd have to sink or swim on our own, Uncle Paolo said firmly, which is what should have been happening all along. But Raphael, your restaurants might fail, he acknowledged. And if they do, I'll deal with that. I'll figure out what I did wrong, learn from it, and try again. Or I'll discover that I'm not cut out to be a restaurant owner and find something else to do with my life. Dad, your law practice might go under, Vincent said, finally turning from the window, and if it does, I'll either adapt or retire early. But at least I'll know that whatever happens is a result of my own choices and capabilities. Marco consulted his notebook again. We've talked to Harrison about the logistics. It's complicated because some of the businesses are financially integrated, but he thinks it's doable. You've already talked to Harrison? Adriana felt blindsided. We hired our own accountant, Carmela explained, someone who doesn't have divided loyalties. We needed independent advice about our options. The revelation that they'd been planning this without her input was another shock. But as she processed it, she realized it was also exactly what she should have expected from people who were trying to reclaim their autonomy. There's more, Raphael said, and his voice carried a new tension. We also discovered some things during our own financial review. What kind of things? It turns out, Uncle Paolo said grimly, that your secret support wasn't as secret as you thought, at least not from everyone. Adriana's blood went cold. What do you mean? Marco pulled out a different set of papers. 3 local banks have been tracking the unusual investment patterns in our family's businesses. They've been quietly investigating what they assumed was either money laundering or fraud. That's impossible. Everything was completely legal. Legal, yes, Vincent said in his courtroom voice, but also suspicious. A series of businesses all experiencing financial difficulties, then suddenly receiving anonymous investments from what appeared to be unrelated sources, all of which turned out to be connected to a single individual. Aunt Gianna leaned forward. Adriana, the FBI has opened a preliminary investigation. The words hit her like a sledgehammer. The FBI? Financial Crimes Unit, Vincent confirmed. They're looking into possible racketeering, suspicious financial activity, and potential tax evasion related to the use of multiple shell companies to obscure the source of investments. But there's no crime here. It's all documented, all properly reported. To your accountant and your lawyers, Raphael said, but not to the people actually receiving the money. We didn't report income that we didn't know we were receiving. We didn't declare gifts that we didn't know we were getting. The room began to spin as Adriana realized the full scope of what was happening. Her elaborate structure of secrecy and anonymous support, designed to help her family while preserving their pride, had created exactly the kind of financial pattern that triggered federal investigations. "How long have you known about this?" she whispered. "We found out yesterday," Carmela said. "An FBI agent visited Raphael's restaurant, asking questions about his financing. That's when we realized that your secret wasn't just hurting our family relationships, it was potentially destroying our lives." "We need this to end," Vincent said with finality. "Not just for our emotional well-being, but for our legal protection. We can't be unknowing participants in what looks like a financial conspiracy, even if that was never your intention." Adriana sat in stunned silence as the magnitude of the disaster unfolded around her. In trying to protect her family, she'd potentially exposed them to federal prosecution. In trying to help them succeed, she'd created a situation that might result in criminal charges for all of them. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. "Everything has to be transparent from now on," Raphael said. "No more shell companies, no more anonymous investments, no more secret arrangements. Everything out in the open, properly documented, with everyone's full knowledge and consent. And," Vincent added with the weight of legal authority, "we need to voluntarily disclose everything to the FBI before they uncover it themselves. Complete cooperation, complete transparency, complete accountability." Adriana looked around the circle of faces, people she loved, people she'd tried to protect, people whose lives she'd now put in jeopardy through her misguided efforts to help them. "I'll do whatever you need," she said. "I'll fix this." "No," Carmela said firmly, "we'll fix this, together, as a family. But from now on, we make decisions together, with all the information and all the consequences." It was both a reprieve and a challenge. The chance to rebuild their relationships on honest foundations, but only if she could truly let go of the control she'd never realized she was wielding. The masquerade wasn't just ending, it was exploding in ways that threatened everything she'd tried to protect. The next 48 hours unfolded like a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Adriana found herself in the surreal position of dismantling an empire she'd spent 6 years building, while simultaneously preparing for what might be the most important legal battle of her life, one where victory meant proving she'd committed no crimes while helping the people she loved most. Her downtown office had been transformed into a war room. 3 different law firms occupied the conference rooms, her own corporate attorneys handling the business dissolution, a white-collar criminal defense team preparing for the FBI meeting, and a family law specialist navigating the complex emotional and legal relationships between the various parties. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was paying more in legal fees per day than most people earned in a year, all to prove she'd given away millions of dollars without criminal intent. "The good news," said Patricia Huang, her lead criminal defense attorney, "is that intent matters in financial crimes prosecution. The bad news is that impact matters too, and the impact here is a paper trail that looks exactly like what we see in money laundering cases." Adriana rubbed her temples, fighting off a headache that had been building for days. But everything was reported. Every transaction, every investment, every transfer, it's all documented with Harrison's firm. Documented to your advisors, yes, but not disclosed to the recipients, which creates the appearance of concealment. From the FBI's perspective, you have a pattern of using multiple shell companies to funnel money to specific individuals while obscuring the source. That's textbook money laundering methodology, regardless of the benign purpose. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Adriana could see Marcus Kim, her corporate attorney, on a heated phone call with what she assumed was another lawyer representing one of her subsidiary companies. The process of unwinding 6 years of carefully constructed business relationships was proving more complex than anyone had anticipated. "How long until we know if they're going to file charges?" she asked. "Could be weeks, could be months. The Bureau moves at its own pace. But Patricia's right about cooperation being our best strategy," said David Chen, the senior partner coordinating her legal defense. "The voluntary disclosure meeting is set for Thursday. We'll present everything. Complete financial records, business justifications for every transaction, character witnesses, and a detailed explanation of the family dynamics that led to this structure." "Character witnesses," Adriana repeated hollowly. "Who's going to vouch for someone who's potentially facing federal charges?" Her phone buzzed with a text from Raphael. "News trucks outside the restaurant. Need to talk." The media attention had started that morning when a business reporter from the Palmetto County Herald had somehow connected the dots between the FBI visits and Adriana's various business interests. The headline read, "Local tech heiress under federal investigation for suspicious financial activity." By afternoon, the story had been picked up by state business publications and was trending on local social media. "I have to go," Adriana told her legal team. "My brother needs help." Patricia looked up sharply. "Adriana, you cannot have any conversations with family members about the case without counsel present. Anything you say to them could be subpoenaed." "He's not asking about the case, he's asking for help dealing with reporters." "Everything is about the case now," David said firmly. "Every interaction you have with your family members is potentially evidence. We've advised them to retain their own counsel, and until this is resolved, all communication needs to go through attorneys." The words hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't even talk to her own brother without a lawyer present. The very relationships she'd been trying to protect were now being held hostage by the legal process. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "We received a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office this morning. They're also looking into potential tax violations related to unreported gifts and income." "What does that mean?" "It means your family members might face charges too, for accepting financial benefits they didn't report to the IRS, even though they didn't know they were receiving them." Adriana felt the room spinning. "They could go to prison because of my attempts to help them?" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," David said quickly. "These are preliminary investigations. No charges have been filed. But we need to prepare for the possibility that this affects everyone involved." The drive to Raphael's restaurant took her through the Riverside district she'd helped develop, past buildings she owned, through communities she'd invested in. Everything she saw now felt tainted by the knowledge that her success might destroy the very people she'd tried to protect. The scene outside Nana's table was chaotic. 2 news vans were parked across the street, and she could see reporters interviewing passers-by about the restaurant and its ownership. A small crowd of curious onlookers had gathered, some taking photos with their phones. She parked 3 blocks away and called Raphael from her car. "Thank God," his voice was strained. "This is insane, Adriana. I've had reporters asking me about money laundering and organized crime." Mrs. Peterson from down the street asked if I was in the mafia. I'm 3 blocks away, but my lawyers say I can't come in. They say everything we discuss could be used as evidence. Evidence of what? Evidence that my sister tried to help me keep my restaurant open? Evidence of criminal conspiracy, apparently. The silence on the line stretched until Adriana wondered if the call had dropped. This is really happening, Raphael said finally. We could actually go to prison. I won't let that happen. How can you stop it? You're the one they're investigating. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Harrison. Rafe, I have to take this. Harrison's calling. Adriana. Harrison's voice was tight with stress. We have a problem. The FBI just served search warrants on my office. What are they looking for? Everything. Every document, every file, every communication related to your business activities and your family's financial arrangements. They're treating this as a major financial crimes investigation. Through her windshield, Adriana could see more news vans arriving at the restaurant. The story was growing, and with it, the pressure on both the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office to produce results. There's more, Harrison continued. I just got off the phone with Vincent's attorney. The State Bar Association has opened an ethics investigation into his practice, triggered by the federal investigation. They're looking at whether he had knowledge of potentially illegal financial arrangements. This is destroying everyone, Adriana whispered. It gets worse. Raphael's restaurant licenses are being reviewed by the city. Apparently, business permits can be revoked if the ownership structure involves criminal activity. But there is no criminal activity. Try explaining that to bureaucrats who are covering their own liability. Everyone's in damage control mode, and that means distancing themselves from anything that looks questionable. Adriana ended the call and sat in her car, watching the circus surrounding her brother's restaurant. A business he'd built with his own hands, serving food he'd perfected through years of practice, was now under siege because she'd tried to help him succeed. Her phone rang again. This time it was Marcus Kim, her corporate attorney. Adriana, we've got another situation. 3 of your major investors are demanding emergency meetings. The federal investigation is spooking them, and they're considering pulling their funding from your venture capital firm. How much funding? Approximately $40 million. If they pull out, it could trigger a cascade of other investors doing the same. Your entire portfolio could be at risk. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the headrest. Everything she'd built was collapsing simultaneously. Her family relationships, her business empire, her freedom, and now potentially her family's freedom as well. Marcus, what are the chances that this goes away quietly? Honestly, very low. There's too much media attention now, too much political pressure. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney need to be seen as taking financial crimes seriously. Even if they ultimately don't file charges, the investigation process could take years and destroy your reputation permanently. And my family? Depends on how cooperative they are, how clean their personal finances are, and how convincingly we can demonstrate that they were unwitting recipients rather than willing participants. After ending the call, Adriana sat in the gathering dusk and faced the full magnitude of what she'd set in motion. Her attempt to help her family succeed, without their knowledge, had created a federal case that might destroy all of them. Her desire to preserve their pride had resulted in a public humiliation that was being broadcast across the state. She started her car and drove home through streets that felt foreign now, past buildings that might soon belong to other people, toward a future that had become completely unpredictable. The empire she'd built to protect her family had become the weapon that might destroy them all. Thursday morning arrived with an unseasonable thunderstorm that seemed to mirror the chaos surrounding the Castellano family. Adriana stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her charcoal gray suit for the 3rd time, knowing that in 2 hours she would be sitting across from federal agents who might decide whether she spent the next decade in prison. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly since 6 a.m., with updates from her legal team, each message carrying increasingly dire news. The FBI had expanded their investigation to include potential RICO violations, suggesting they suspected an organized criminal enterprise rather than misguided family assistance. The U.S. Attorney's Office had leaked to the press that they were considering charges against multiple family members, turning what had been a local business story into a statewide scandal about organized crime and political corruption. "Miss Castellano?" Her doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. "There's a gentleman here to see you. Says his name is Rafael Castellano and that it's urgent." Her heart stopped. Rafael wasn't supposed to be here. Their attorneys had strictly forbidden any direct contact until after the federal meeting. If the FBI discovered they'd met privately, it could be used as evidence of obstruction or witness tampering. "Send him up," she said anyway. Rafael looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands shook as he accepted the coffee she offered. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," he said without preamble. "I know our lawyers said no contact, but I had to tell you something before you meet with the FBI. Rafe, if they find out we talked..." "They're going to arrest Marco," he interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "His lawyer called this morning. The FBI traced some of the equipment financing for the restaurant expansion to a company that was already under investigation for other financial crimes. They think Marco was a willing participant in money laundering through our business." Adriana sank into her chair, the full horror of the situation crashing over her. Marco, Rafael's best friend and business partner who'd never hurt anyone in his life, was about to be arrested because of financial arrangements she'd secretly orchestrated. "There's more," Rafael continued, his voice breaking. "They've frozen all the restaurant accounts. We can't pay staff, can't buy food, can't operate. Everything's shut down as of this morning. But the restaurants are your livelihood." "Were our livelihood." Past tense. "The city revoked our business licenses pending the outcome of the federal investigation. The landlord, your shell company, received a notice that the properties might be subject to federal asset forfeiture." Adriana felt the room spinning. Not only had she destroyed her brother's business, but the federal government might seize the very buildings she'd bought to help him succeed. "Dad's law firm is finished too," Rafael continued relentlessly. "The state bar suspended his license pending the ethics investigation. Mom's charity lost their tax-exempt status because of questions about funding sources. Uncle Paolo's construction company can't get bonded because of the federal investigation." Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of everything she'd tried to build. "How long have you known all this?" "Since yesterday. We've been meeting with lawyers, accountants, crisis management consultants. The consensus is that we're all going down unless someone takes full responsibility and clears everyone else." "I'll do it," she said immediately. "I'll tell them it was all me, that none of you knew anything." "That's not what I came here to say." Rafael leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Adriana, there's something you don't know, something we should have told you 6 years ago." "What are you talking about?" "We knew," he said quietly. "Not everything, not the full scope. But we knew someone was helping us. We knew the financing deals were too good to be true. We knew the anonymous donations were too convenient. We knew the mysterious investors always appeared exactly when we needed them most." Adriana stared at him in shock. "You knew?" "We suspected it was you. Who else cared enough about our success to go to such elaborate lengths? Who else had the business knowledge to structure deals that helped us without making us feel like charity cases? Then why didn't you say anything?" Rafael's face crumpled. "Because we were proud. Because we were scared. Because it was easier to pretend we didn't know than to admit we needed our little sister's help to keep our lives together." The betrayal hit her harder than any FBI investigation could. "You let me believe I was deceiving you. You let me carry the guilt of lying to my family for 6 years. We thought it was working. We thought everyone was getting what they needed. You gotta help us. We gotta keep our pride. The family stayed together." He ran his hands through his hair. "We didn't realize that keeping secrets from each other would create this." This isn't about secrets anymore, Rafe. This is about federal crimes and prison sentences. I know, that's why I'm here. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This is a sworn statement admitting that the entire family knew about your financial support and actively participated in concealing it from authorities. It implicates all of us equally. Absolutely not. Adriana pushed the envelope away without opening it. I won't let you destroy your lives to save mine. It's not about saving your life, it's about saving our family. If we all go down claiming we didn't know anything, we look like either idiots or liars. But if we admit we were willing participants in what we thought was family financial planning, it changes the narrative. To what? A criminal conspiracy involving the entire family? To a family that made some poor legal choices but had no criminal intent. Stupid, maybe. Guilty of not properly reporting some financial arrangements, yes, but not money launderers or racketeers. Adriana stared at the envelope, understanding for the first time the full scope of what her family was willing to sacrifice. They were prepared to accept criminal liability to protect her from facing the consequences alone. There's something else, Raphael said. Something that happened yesterday that changes everything. What now? The FBI arrested the wrong person. What do you mean? They arrested Antonio Vega, the guy who owns that construction company that was involved in some of our financing deals. Turns out he actually was running a money laundering operation, using legitimate businesses as fronts for drug money. Adriana felt a glimmer of hope. So they caught the real criminal? Not exactly. Because some of our deals were processed through his companies, the FBI now thinks we were part of his operation. They think you were the mastermind using drug money to fund your family's businesses. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared, but that's insane. I've never had any connection to drug money or criminal enterprises. Try explaining that when your financial patterns match exactly what they expect to see in a money laundering case. They think you were using legitimate family assistance as cover for moving illegal funds. This keeps getting worse. It gets worse than that, Raphael said grimly. Vega is cooperating with federal agents. He's claiming that you approached him about laundering money through legitimate business investments. He's saying you masterminded the whole operation. Adriana felt the last foundations of her world crumbling. Not only was she facing federal charges for helping her family, but now she was being framed as a drug money launderer by someone she'd never met. Why would he lie about that? Because lying about you might get him a reduced sentence. And because the FBI wants to believe they've uncovered a major criminal enterprise, rather than admit they've been investigating a family financial misunderstanding. So what happens now? Raphael stood up, his decision clearly made. Now we all tell the truth, the whole truth, about what we knew, when we knew it, and why we made the choices we made. We stop trying to protect each other and start trusting that honesty might be our only way out of this mess. And if honesty doesn't work, if they decide to prosecute anyway, then we face the consequences together, as a family, the way we should have been doing all along. As Raphael left, Adriana realized that in 90 minutes, she would be sitting across from federal agents who believed she was a criminal mastermind, armed with nothing but the truth about her love for her family and her misguided attempts to help them succeed. The truth had never felt more powerless or more necessary. 9. The FBI field office in downtown Palmetto was a sterile monument to federal authority, all concrete and bulletproof glass that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who entered. Adriana sat in the waiting area, flanked by her 3 attorneys, watching other lawyers shuttle past with the grim efficiency of people accustomed to watching lives destroyed by legal proceedings. Remember, Patricia whispered for the 10th time, answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information, don't try to explain or justify, just facts. At exactly 2 p.m., they were escorted into a conference room that felt more like an interrogation chamber. Special Agent Sarah Martinez sat across the table, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sharp with the intensity of someone who believed she was about to crack a major case. Beside her sat Agent Robert Kim and Assistant U.S. Attorney James Harrison. Not her Harrison, but a federal prosecutor who specialized in financial crimes and had never lost a RICO case. Miss Castellano, Agent Martinez began, "You understand that you're here voluntarily and can leave at any time." "I understand." "Good. Let's start with a simple question. Do you know Antonio Vega?" The name hit like a sledgehammer, even though Raphael had warned her it was coming. "No, I do not." "Have you ever had any business dealings with Vega Construction and Development?" "Not directly, no." "What does 'not directly' mean?" Adriana looked at Patricia, who nodded slightly. "Some of my subsidiary companies may have used construction services from various contractors. I don't personally oversee those relationships." Agent Kim leaned forward. "Miss Castellano, Mr. Vega has told us that you personally approached him about laundering money through legitimate business investments. He says you paid him to process financial transactions through his company to obscure the source of funds going to your family members." "That's absolutely false." "He's very specific about the details," Assistant U.S. Attorney Harrison interjected. "He says you met him at the Riverside Harbor Hotel in March of last year. He says you offered him 2% of every transaction he processed for you." Adriana felt the blood drain from her face. She had been at the Riverside Harbor Hotel in March of last year for a legitimate business conference. But how could she prove she hadn't met with Vega without detailed alibis that she didn't have? "I've never met with Mr. Vega. I've never offered anyone money to launder funds. I've never been involved in any criminal activity." "Then how do you explain the financial patterns we've identified?" Agent Martinez slid a thick folder across the table. 37 separate transactions over 6 years, totaling $4.2 million, moving from various shell companies to your family members, businesses, all processed through contractors and financial services that we now know were part of Vega's money laundering network. Adriana opened the folder and stared at a detailed chart that made her stomach drop. Every transaction she'd made to help her family was there, connected by red lines to companies she'd never heard of, all leading back to Vega's operation. On paper, it looked exactly like what the agent suspected, a sophisticated money laundering scheme using family assistance as cover. "I don't understand these connections," she said honestly. "I don't know how my transactions got routed through companies associated with Mr. Vega." "Because you're lying," Agent Kim said bluntly. "Because you specifically chose those companies to hide the source of your funds." "No, Ms. Castellano," Assistant U.S. Attorney Harrison interrupted. "Let me be very clear about your situation. We have documentary evidence of money laundering. We have a cooperating witness who's identified you as the organizer of the operation. And we have a pattern of behavior spanning 6 years. We also have evidence that your family members were aware of and participated in these arrangements." The mention of her family made Adriana's heart race. "My family had nothing to do with this. They didn't know." "They didn't know?" Agent Martinez pulled out another folder. "We have bank records showing that your brother Raphael made cash deposits totaling $340,000 over the past 3 years, always in amounts just under federal reporting requirements. Your father received a $200,000 retainer payment that he never reported to the State Bar Association. Your mother's charity received donations that were never properly documented for tax purposes." Each revelation felt like another nail in her family's coffin. They had known about her help, but they clearly hadn't understood the legal implications of accepting unreported income. "Furthermore," the prosecutor continued, "we've discovered that several of your legitimate business ventures were used to generate clean money that was then funneled to your family. Your green energy startup, your real estate developments, your venture capital investments, all generating revenue that helped fund what appears to be a family-wide money laundering operation." That's not what happened, Adriana protested, but even she could hear how weak her voice sounded. Then what did happen? Agent Martinez leaned back in her chair. Explain to us how an innocent family assistance plan ended up routed through a known criminal enterprise. For the first time in her adult life, Adriana had no answer. She understood business, she understood finance, she understood legal structures. But she couldn't explain how her careful planning had somehow intersected with actual criminal activity. I think, Patricia said quietly, we need to pause this interview to review the new information you've presented. Of course, the prosecutor said smoothly. But I want Miss Castellano to understand what's at stake here. We're prepared to seek RICO charges, which carry a potential sentence of 20 years in federal prison. We're looking at money laundering in the first degree, conspiracy, tax evasion, and wire fraud charges for multiple family members. What do you want? Adriana asked directly. Complete cooperation, Agent Martinez replied. Full disclosure of every financial transaction, every business relationship, every family arrangement. Names, dates, amounts, methods, everything. And if I cooperate fully, what happens to my family? That depends on their level of cooperation and the extent of their involvement. But Ms. Castellano, I want to be clear. We believe your family members were willing participants in this operation. Your brother's cash deposits, your father's unreported income, your mother's undocumented donations. These aren't the actions of innocent victims. After the interview ended, Adriana sat in her attorney's office staring out at the city she'd called home for over a decade. Everything she'd built was crumbling, but worse than that, everyone she loved was being destroyed by her attempts to help them. How bad is it? She asked Patricia. Honestly, it's bad. The connections to Vega's operation are circumstantial but damaging. His testimony puts you at the center of a criminal conspiracy. The financial patterns support his claims. And the family's behavior, the cash deposits, the unreported income, makes them look like willing participants rather than unknowing beneficiaries. What are our options? Plea bargain, full cooperation in exchange for reduced sentences for everyone involved. Or we fight it and risk RICO convictions for the entire family. What would a plea bargain look like? For you, probably 8 to 10 years in federal prison. For your family members, maybe 2 to 5 years each, depending on their cooperation level. Adriana closed her eyes and tried to process the magnitude of what she'd done. In trying to help her family succeed, she'd exposed them all to federal prosecution. In trying to preserve their pride, she'd destroyed their lives. In trying to solve their financial problems, she'd created legal catastrophes that might separate them all for decades. There's one more thing, Patricia said quietly. The media has gotten hold of Vega's claims. By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the state will be reporting that you're the mastermind of a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation involving your entire family. So even if we're eventually cleared, our reputations are destroyed forever. I'm afraid so. Adriana sat in the gathering darkness and faced the full reality of what she'd accomplished. She'd wanted to help her family succeed without damaging their pride. Instead, she'd exposed them to public humiliation, federal prosecution, and potential imprisonment. She'd wanted to solve their problems quietly and efficiently. Instead, she'd created problems so complex and dangerous that they might never be resolved. The empire she'd built had become a prison, not just for her, but for everyone she loved. Adriana didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with every financial document from the past 6 years spread before her, desperately searching for some explanation of how her careful family assistants had become entangled with an actual criminal enterprise. The connection to Vega's operation made no sense. She'd never heard his name before yesterday, never knowingly used his companies, never had any contact with construction or development projects beyond her own real estate investments. At 3:47 a.m., her phone rang. Harrison's name appeared on the screen. "I know it's late," he said without preamble, "but I've been going through the FBI's evidence list, and I found something that changes everything." "What?" "Can you meet me at my office in an hour? And bring your corporate attorney. We're going to need Marcus for this." Harrison's accounting firm occupied the top floor of a glass tower that dominated downtown Palmetto's financial district. When Adriana arrived, she found not just Harrison and Marcus waiting, but also a woman she didn't recognize. Asian, middle-aged, wearing the kind of expensive suit that screamed federal government. "Adriana," Harrison said, his voice carrying an excitement she hadn't heard in weeks. "This is Special Agent Linda Chen, Financial Crimes Division." Adriana's blood went cold. "Another FBI agent?" "Not another agent," Agent Chen said calmly. "The agent who's been investigating Antonio Vega for the past 3 years. And I need to tell you something that my colleagues apparently failed to mention yesterday." She opened a laptop and turned the screen toward Adriana. "Mr. Vega has been under federal surveillance for money laundering, tax evasion, and racketeering since 2019. What you're looking at is a complete record of every business transaction his operation processed during that time." The screen showed a complex flowchart of financial transactions, with hundreds of companies and individuals connected to Vega's network. Adriana scanned the names, looking for any connection to her own businesses or family members. "I don't see any of my companies listed here." "Exactly," Agent Chen said, "because none of your transactions actually went through Vega's operation. The connections that Agent Martinez showed you yesterday were fabricated." "Fabricated?" Marcus leaned forward. "What do you mean fabricated?" "I mean that someone created false documentation to make it appear that Miss Castellano's legitimate business transactions were routed through companies associated with Vega's money laundering network." Agent Chen pulled up another document. "These invoices, these bank transfer records, these corporate filings, they're all forgeries." Adriana felt the room spinning. "But who would forge documents to frame me?" Agent Chen's expression darkened. "Someone who knew enough about your business operations to create convincing forgeries. Someone who had access to your transaction details and your family's financial information. Someone who understood both your corporate structure and Vega's criminal network." Harrison cleared his throat. "Adriana, there's something else. I've been analyzing the forged documents, and they contain information that wasn't available in any public records. Banking details, internal corporate memos, family financial data that was supposed to be confidential." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone with inside access to your financial information has been setting you up." Agent Chen nodded grimly. "We believe Mr. Vega's cooperation with the FBI is part of a larger strategy to shift blame for his criminal enterprise onto an innocent party. Someone provided him with detailed information about your family's financial arrangements and helped him create a narrative that would make you appear to be the mastermind of his operation." "But how could Vega know about our family dynamics, our business relationships, our—" Adriana stopped mid-sentence as a horrible possibility occurred to her. "Harrison, who else has access to all our financial records?" "Just my staff and, oh God," Harrison's face went white. "David Mitchell." "Who's David Mitchell?" "My former business partner. He left the firm 8 months ago after I discovered he'd been selling client information to competitors. I thought it was just corporate espionage for business advantage. I never imagined." Marcus was already typing on his laptop. "David Mitchell, arrested in 2018 for securities fraud. Charges dropped due to prosecutorial misconduct. Started working for Harrison's firm in 2019, right after Vega's money laundering operation began ramping up." Agent Chen nodded. "We've been tracking Mitchell for months. He's been providing Vega with information about wealthy families in the region, helping him identify potential targets for money laundering schemes. But when Vega got arrested, Mitchell needed a fall guy, someone wealthy enough to seem like a credible criminal mastermind. And I was perfect," Adriana said bitterly. "Rich, secretive about my family financial arrangements, with a complex corporate structure that could be made to look suspicious. More than that, Harrison said, his voice full of guilt. Mitchell knew about your family's struggles, your secret assistants, your elaborate shell company structure. He knew exactly how to frame the narrative to make you look guilty. Agent Chen leaned forward. Miss Castellano, I need you to understand something. Yesterday's interview was not an official FBI investigation. Agents Martinez and Kim were acting on information provided by Mitchell through Vega's attorney. They were essentially pursuing a case built on fabricated evidence. Then why didn't you stop them? Because I needed them to proceed far enough for Mitchell to reveal himself. We've been building a case against him for months, but we needed him to actively participate in framing an innocent party to get the conspiracy charges we needed. Marcus looked up from his laptop. Agent Chen, are you saying that Adriana's entire family has been put through this nightmare as part of an FBI sting operation? I'm saying that sometimes the only way to catch a sophisticated criminal is to let them commit one more crime. And framing an innocent family for money laundering is exactly the kind of crime we needed Mitchell to commit. Adriana felt a mixture of relief and rage that threatened to overwhelm her. So my family isn't going to prison? Your family was never going to prison, Agent Chen assured her. The charges against them were always based on fabricated evidence. But we needed Mitchell to believe his frame job was working, so we had to let the investigation proceed until we could document his criminal involvement. What about the media attention, the destroyed reputations, the business licenses that were revoked? All of that can be reversed once we make arrests and the truth comes out. Your brother's restaurants can reopen, your father's law license can be reinstated, your mother's charity can regain its tax-exempt status. The damage was real, but it's not permanent. Harrison stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. Adriana, I'm so sorry. If I'd been more careful about Mitchell's background, if I'd done better due diligence when he joined the firm. You couldn't have known, she said, but her voice was hollow. The relief of learning her family wouldn't face criminal charges was overshadowed by the realization that they'd all been manipulated and used as pawns in a federal investigation. Agent Chen closed her laptop. There's going to be a press conference tomorrow morning announcing Mitchell's arrest and the exposure of his scheme to frame your family. The U.S. Attorney will publicly clear you and your family members of any wrongdoing. And then what? Adriana asked. How do we go back to being a normal family after all this? That, Agent Chen said quietly, is not something the FBI can help you with. After the agent left, Adriana sat in Harrison's office, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. In a few hours, the truth would be revealed, her family would be cleared, and the nightmare of the past few weeks would officially end. But she knew that the real work, rebuilding trust, reconstructing relationships, and learning to be honest with each other, was just beginning. The lies were finally over. Now came the much harder task of living with the truth. 6 months later, Adriana stood in the kitchen of her childhood home, helping her mother prepare Sunday dinner just as she had countless times before. But everything was different now, even as everything appeared the same. The familiar rituals of family gathering carried new weight, each conversation layered with the kind of honesty that had been absent for years. The press conference clearing the Castellano family had made national news, not just for the dramatic reversal of fortune, but for the broader story of how financial privacy and family dynamics could be weaponized by sophisticated criminals. David Mitchell was serving a 12-year federal sentence for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. Antonio Vega had received an additional 5 years for his role in the frame job. The FBI had issued formal apologies, and several procedural changes had been implemented to prevent similar investigative overreach. But the legal vindication, while satisfying, had been the easy part. "Hand me that oregano," Carmela said, stirring the sauce that filled the kitchen with the smells of Adriana's childhood. "And tell me about the Riverside District meeting next week." It was a small request, but it represented months of careful relationship rebuilding. For the first time in 6 years, Adriana's mother was asking directly about her business activities, showing genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. The community group wants to establish a formal partnership structure for future development, Adriana explained, seasoning the salad. Instead of me making unilateral decisions about the neighborhood's growth, we're creating a board that includes longtime residents, local business owners, and community organizers. That sounds like it could get complicated, lots of competing interests. Probably, but it's the right way to do it. I should have involved the community from the beginning, instead of assuming I knew what was best for everyone. Carmela paused her stirring and looked at her daughter. We all made assumptions about what was best for everyone. That's what families do when they're afraid of difficult conversations. The acknowledgement hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of everything they'd learned about themselves and each other over the past months. The family therapy sessions had been brutal at first, facilitated conversations about trust, autonomy, communication, and the difference between helping and controlling. But slowly, painfully, they'd begun to understand how their mutual desire to protect each other had created elaborate deceptions that nearly destroyed them all. Is Raphael nervous about tonight? Carmela asked. I think we all are. Tonight was the soft reopening of Nana's Table, Raphael's flagship restaurant. After months of closure during the investigation, renovation during the legal proceedings, and careful planning during the recovery, he was finally ready to cook for customers again. But more than that, tonight represented the first time the entire extended family would be together in public since the scandal broke. The dining room door swung open, and Vincent entered carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression that Adriana had learned to recognize as his difficult conversation face. We need to talk, he said without preamble, all of us, before everyone else arrives. They gathered in the living room, the same space where their world had exploded 6 months earlier. But the seating arrangement was different now. No empty chair set apart, no hierarchical positioning. They sat in a genuine circle, close enough to see each other's expressions clearly. I've been thinking about what I want to say tonight, Vincent began. About the speech Raphael asked me to give at the restaurant reopening. And I realized I need to say it to you first, Adriana. He took a deep breath, the lawyer's composure giving way to something more vulnerable. I was wrong about you. Not just about the business success, though I was certainly wrong about that. I was wrong about who you are as a person, about your judgment, about your capabilities. He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. I spent so many years trying to protect you from making mistakes that I never saw you'd stopped making them. I never recognized that you'd become someone I could learn from instead of someone I needed to guide. Dad, let me finish. When this whole nightmare started, my first instinct was to be angry that you'd hidden your success from us. But during those therapy sessions, I realized something. We'd given you every reason to hide it. Every time you tried to share your achievements, we minimized them. Every time you offered advice, we dismissed it. We trained you to keep secrets from us, and then we were hurt when you did. Carmela nodded. I've been thinking about that conversation we had when you wanted to leave law school. I was so focused on stability and respectability that I never asked what you actually wanted to build with your life. But I should have been honest with you, Adriana protested. I should have trusted you with the truth instead of creating this elaborate structure of anonymity. Maybe, Raphael said, entering the room with Marco trailing behind. But we should have created a family where honesty felt safe, where success was celebrated instead of questioned, where help could be offered and received without damaging anyone's pride. Marco, who'd been quietly rebuilding his own life after the trauma of false arrest, spoke up. I think we all learned something about the difference between independence and isolation. There's nothing wrong with needing help, and there's nothing wrong with being able to provide it. The question is, Uncle Paulo said, appearing in the doorway with Aunt Gianna, what do we do differently going forward? It was the question they'd been building toward for months. The legal crisis had been resolved. The public vindication had been achieved, and the businesses had been restored, but the fundamental family dynamics that had created the original problem still needed to be addressed. "I have a proposal," Adriana said, pulling out a folder she'd been carrying. "Something I've been working on with Harrison. The new Harrison, since the old one is obviously fired." She smiled at her own joke, earning the first genuine laughter the family had shared in months. "I want to create something called the Castellano Family Partnership. Not a business entity, but a formal structure for how we make decisions about money, support, and business relationships within the family." She opened the folder and distributed copies of a document that had taken her weeks to draft. It establishes guidelines for financial transparency, creates a process for family members to request or offer assistance, and sets up regular meetings where we discuss everyone's business activities and challenges openly. Vincent scanned the document with his lawyer's eye. "This is incredibly detailed." "Because we're incredibly complicated," Adriana replied. "We need structure if we're going to avoid falling back into old patterns." "What about your business empire?" Aunt Gianna asked. "What happens to all those companies and investments?" "Most of it stays the same, but with one crucial difference: complete transparency. Every family member gets quarterly reports on any business activities that affect them. Every investment decision that could impact family interests gets discussed openly. No more secrets, no more anonymous assistance." "And if we disagree with your business decisions?" Raphael asked. "Then we argue about it like adults, and I either convince you I'm right or I change course based on your input, just like any other family business partnership." Carmela looked around the circle of faces. "Are we really ready for this level of honesty? For arguments about money and business decisions at family dinners?" "As opposed to the alternative?" Marco asked, "which apparently involves federal investigations and prison threats." The laughter that followed was rueful but genuine. "I think," Vincent said slowly, "that we're finally ready to trust each other with the truth. All of it. The successes, the failures, the fears and the dreams." As they prepared to leave for Raphael's restaurant reopening, Adriana realized that the family gathering they were about to attend would be unlike any they'd had before. Not because of the public setting or the media attention, but because for the first time in years, they were going as themselves, flawed, complicated, successful and struggling in different ways, but finally, genuinely honest with each other. The masquerade was over, and what remained was something far more valuable than what they'd lost: a family that had learned to tell the truth, even when it was difficult. As they walked out into the evening air, Adriana felt something she hadn't experienced in months: the simple pleasure of belonging to a family that knew exactly who she was and loved her anyway. The empire she'd built in secret had been impressive, but the relationships she was building in the open were proving to be her greatest achievement yet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.